On February 14th, 2018, as I was walking into my last class of the day, scrolling through Facebook on my phone and eating the last of my Valentine's Day chocolate before class started, I saw a breaking news alert flash. A gunman in Parkland, Florida had just killed 17 people at a high school just like mine. Later that evening, as my mom and I discussed the news, our conversation slowly shifted into the hypothetical question: what would I or any of my 6 siblings do in the event of a school shooting? While I was of course scared for myself, I was most scared for what could happen to my then 9-year-old sister, Charlotte. You see, Charlotte is autistic. For her, when she's scared or stressed, she shrieks, yells, and cannot be calmed. For her, staying silent and hiding in the event of a school shooting wouldn't be possible. This realization that Charlotte was undoubtedly at a higher risk of being harmed consumed me for days. I felt the need to do something. I needed to know that I was doing everything in my power to keep Charlotte safe. So 4 days later, I started the March for Our Lives Seattle chapter. For those of you who don't know, March for Our Lives was started after the shooting in Parkland, Florida, with the mission to reduce gun violence in the U.S. and promote youth civic engagement. I was excited to launch this in Seattle, but there was one problem. My then 17-year-old self had no idea how to actually plan a march. But, like many teenagers, I did know how to spread the word. So I started there and launched Facebook and Instagram pages. Within 24 hours, 1,000 people had already signed up on Facebook. After this, my friend Rhiannon and I decided to launch a GoFundMe site to hopefully raise $500 to start covering the march costs. But we didn't end up just raising $500. We ended up raising $45,000, a number that just continued to grow. In the days leading up to the march, I was overcome with fear that no one would show up on the day of the march. I was scared that all my speakers would come to talk to an empty audience. What was I going to do? What was I going to tell my mom? But on the day of the march itself, I overslept through my alarm and rushed to the venue in a panic. I watched as people slowly started to trickle in the hours before the march and realized everything was going to be okay. I'll never forget the sight from the stage that day. There were seas of people in all directions. As I looked out into the crowds, I tried to pinpoint where they ended, but I couldn't. In just 33 days, we'd managed to bring together nearly 100,000 people to protest gun violence. And it all started with just one Facebook post. And the days and weeks after the march, I was overcome with emotion. On the one end, I was proud of the success and turnout of the march, but on the other, I still had this inescapable what now feeling. Sure, we'd all just come together to call for gun control, but nothing had actually changed. Charlotte wasn't any safer, and the public was losing interest. How could we replicate the success and turnout from the march to call for longer-lasting change? What about the March for Our Lives movement had given strangers a strong enough reason to care, and not just care, but show up? There were a few distinguishing factors. First, our demographics. It's no secret that the March for Our Lives organizers were primarily all white, upper-middle class, and well-educated youth, an image that America feels safe with. This implicit bias is important to acknowledge when comparing the success and turnout and how society perceives a movement. Next, our timing. The Parkland shooting didn't begin or end the gun violence epidemic in America, but suddenly it was all that anyone was talking about. Without the public's sympathy and support, March for Our Lives wouldn't be where it is today, which brings me to my last key factor, the why. As Simon Sinek, another TED speaker, pointed out, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. For me, my why was fear. Fear that my siblings and friends would be the next victims of gun violence. Fear was what led my peers and I to plan the march, and perhaps fear was what led the 100,000 people who showed up that day. Fear can be a powerful emotion. On the one end, it can be used for good. It's what drove me to action. But on the other, fear can be dangerous. Fear is why Americans are arming themselves. 63% of handgun owners report to owning a firearm for, quote, personal protection. Fear is why we have more guns than people in the U.S. America is clinging so tightly to the idea that guns will provide them safety and security, when in fact, owning a firearm leaves you more susceptible to being a victim of a violent crime, homicide, or suicide. How can we transform this idea that guns are going to keep us safe and instead transform it into the idea that guns are not the be-all and end-all solution? Since the launch of March for Our Lives nearly 2 years ago, we've been able to advocate for and pass legislation such as the King County Gun Safety and Action Plan, the Safe Storage Act in Seattle, as well as a resolution to not arm Seattle Public Schools teachers, as well as Initiative I-1639, which raises the age from 18 to 21 to purchase a semi-automatic rifle, enhances background checks, and requires a firearms training course. When I started March for Our Lives nearly 2 years ago, I had no idea what I was doing. I could never have imagined that I'd be here today to cite this amazing progress with you all, thanks to the hard work and dedication of fellow activist groups and the voters of Washington State. And while this progress is amazing, my biggest fear still remains. It's not enough to keep kids like Charlotte safe. Without substantial cultural change around the way that we view guns in our society and federal legislative change, the gun violence epidemic is going to continue to take lives and wreak havoc in our communities, which is why it is so important that we not only elect leaders that will put these policies in place for us, but that we also stand up ourselves and advocate for issues like these that matter to us. My experiences with March for Our Lives Seattle have taught me so much, but most importantly, it's taught me how to use fear to create positive change. Imagine where we could be if every American leveraged their fear in the same way. What could the world look like today? Anyone can do this. So I ask you, what's an issue that really scares you? Go grab your friends and do something about it. Thank you.